You'll never be good enough for my son. Take this money and stay away from him.
Brenda sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a room that was not her own, staring at an envelope of money she hated, listening to the sound of rain against a window that did not belong to her life. 3 hours earlier, she had walked out of the only place she had ever truly felt loved, and she had not looked back, because she knew that if she looked back, even once, she would never find the strength to leave it all. Somewhere across the city, in a house with more rooms than memories, a man named Anthony Whitfield was about to come home to find that the woman he loved had vanished without a single word of explanation, and he would spend the following months searching for the woman he loved, never imagining that the answer had been hidden inside his own home all along. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how it came to this, you have to go back to the beginning, to a quiet Tuesday morning when Brenda first walked through the gates of the Whitfield estate, carrying nothing but a small bag and a resume built on hunger rather than privilege. She had no idea that the cold, distracted man reading emails on his phone in the foyer would one day become the reason her heart both broke and healed. She had no idea that his mother, elegant and watching from the top of the staircase with narrowed eyes, would become the architect of the most painful decision of her life. Anthony barely looked up when she introduced herself that first day. He offered a curt nod, muttered something about the schedule, and returned to his screen. Brenda, unbothered, simply nodded back and got to work, because she had learned a long time ago that rich men rarely noticed the people who kept their lives running smoothly, and she preferred it that way. She was 29, raising her younger brother Emmanuel since their parents had died in an accident 7 years earlier, and every decision she made was in service of keeping him fed, housed, and in school. Anthony's wealth meant nothing to her except a paycheck that would cover Emmanuel's tuition for another semester. Anthony, for his part, was 38 and quietly exhausted by a life that looked, from the outside, like everything a person could want. He had inherited his father's real estate empire 5 years earlier, along with his father's name, his father's expectations, and a mother, Eleanor, who measured love and status and worth in bloodlines. He filled his days with meetings and mergers and left little room for anything that could not be quantified on a balance sheet, because feeling things had never gotten him anywhere his mother approved of. Weeks passed in careful distance. Eleanor made her disapproval of the new housekeeper known through pointed comments and dismissive glances, the kind of cruelty dressed up as manners that only the powerless can fully recognize. Brenda absorbed it silently and kept her head down. But small moments, the kind that arrive uninvited, began to soften the space between Anthony and the woman who kept his house running. One evening, he came home late, drained from a boardroom battle, and found her in the kitchen humming to herself, unaware she was being watched. Something about her ease struck him. He asked what she was cooking, and for the first time, they spoke as two people instead of a man and his employee. She told him about Emmanuel. He told her, hesitantly, about the loneliness underneath the empire. It was only 10 minutes, but it was the first honest conversation either of them had had in years. From that night on, Anthony started coming home earlier, finding reasons to linger in the kitchen, reasons to ask about her day. Brenda told herself repeatedly that nothing could come of it, that he belonged to galas and boardrooms while she belonged to bus rides and grocery budgets. But she found herself waiting for those small exchanges anyway. Hearts, as it turns out, rarely listen to reason. During a storm that knocked out the power across the estate, Anthony found her in the hallway checking the windows by candlelight, and in that flickering, uncertain light, stripped of everything that separated them, he told her that she had become the one true thing in his chaotic life. She wept, not from sadness, but from the terrifying relief of finally being seen. That night, they admitted what they had both been denying for weeks. For a brief and beautiful stretch of time, they existed in a world of their own making, stolen moments in the garden after Eleanor had gone to bed, quiet dinners long after the staff had left. Anthony began to question the emptiness of the life he had inherited. Brenda allowed herself, for the first time since her parents died, to imagine a future beyond survival. But secrets in houses like Anthony's do not stay secret for long. Eleanor caught sight of Anthony's hand resting over Brenda's in the garden one evening, and the fury that rose in her was immediate and absolute. She confronted her son that night, reminding him of his father's legacy, of the friends and partners who would never accept a housekeeper as the future Mrs. Whitfield. For the first time in his life, Anthony stood his ground. But Eleanor was not a woman who lost easily, and she began her campaign quietly, one thread at a time, inviting a woman named Victoria Hale to dinner, a woman from an old family, poised and polished, exactly the match Eleanor had always envisioned. Victoria, it should be said, was not the villain Eleanor hoped she would be. In the weeks that followed, as Eleanor pushed her toward Anthony at every dinner and business event, Victoria found herself genuinely trying to understand him, hoping perhaps that the match her mother's old friend had engineered might grow into something real. But she was observant, and she noticed the way Anthony's eyes drifted toward the kitchen doorway during dinners, the way his voice changed when Brenda's name came up by accident. She said nothing to Eleanor about what she suspected. She simply began, quietly, to prepare herself for a truth she sensed was coming. While Eleanor worked on Anthony's future, she also worked on unmaking Brenda's present, small cruelties disguised as household discipline, unreasonable demands disguised as duty. Brenda endured it in silence, choosing to carry the weight alone rather than burden Anthony, not realizing her silence was exactly what Eleanor was counting on. The breaking point came on a quiet afternoon when Anthony was away at an overseas summit. Eleanor summoned Brenda to her private study, and what followed was not shouting or threats, but something far more effective, a calm, almost gentle dismantling of every hope Brenda had allowed herself to hold. Eleanor spoke of the whispers that would follow Brenda at every event for the rest of her life, the way the world would never let her forget where she came from. She spoke of Emmanuel, of the future Brenda could secure for him with one quiet decision. And then she offered the envelope, framing it not as cruelty but as mercy, protection from a life that would eventually crush her. Brenda refused, her pride and her love rising up fiercely. But Eleanor did not stop there. She returned the next day, and the day after that, each conversation a little quieter, a little more patient, planting a single image in Brenda's mind that grew heavier with each visit, a picture of Anthony's love slowly curdling into resentment, of their children growing up as outcasts in a world that never accepted their mother. That night, alone in the small staff quarters at the edge of the estate, Brenda did not sleep. She sat with her back against the wall, holding a photograph of herself and Anthony that Marcus had taken at a quiet birthday dinner months earlier, and she cried until she had no tears left. She thought of praying, and did, whispering words she barely remembered from her mother's voice, asking for a sign, for anything, that would tell her what to do. She called Emmanuel, and though she never told him the real reason for her call, she asked him gently what he would think if she made a decision that changed everything, if she disappeared for a while to give him a better life. Emmanuel, sensing something in her voice, begged her not to do anything foolish, told her that whatever it was, they would figure it out together. 3 times that week, she packed her bag with trembling hands, and 3 times she unpacked it again, unable to make herself leave. It was not one decision, but 100 small collapses that finally broke her. A message from Eleanor reminding her, almost kindly, that the offer would not stay open forever. A sleepless night imagining Anthony's face at a business dinner, surrounded by people who would never accept her, slowly forgetting why he had ever loved her in the first place. A quiet, aching fear that loving him might one day cost him everything he had spent his life building. On a gray morning, with hands that would not stop shaking, she packed her bag one final time, took the envelope she despised herself for accepting, and left before she could change her mind again. She left no note, because she knew any explanation would only bring Anthony running after her, and she could not bear to watch him choose her over the only family he had left. When Anthony returned and found the house too quiet, he did not understand at first. He searched every room, called her name, and slowly the silence answered a question he was not ready to hear. He sat for a long time in the kitchen where they used to talk, staring at the same counter, where she had once hummed to herself unaware he was watching, and something in him went very still. What followed were not simply weeks of searching, but months of a grief that refused to resolve itself. He called her number so many times it eventually went straight to a disconnected line. He drove to the small apartment she once mentioned sharing with Emmanuel before she moved into the estate, only to find new tenants who had never heard her name. He sat some evenings in that same kitchen, untouched plate of food in front of him, unable to remember the last time he had eaten a full meal. His work suffered in ways his board began to notice, meetings missed, decisions delayed. A man who had once been sharp and relentless now moving through his days like someone underwater. It was Marcus who refused to let him disappear entirely into that grief. Marcus showed up at the estate uninvited, again and again, sometimes just to sit with him in silence, sometimes to push him hard, to keep functioning, to keep looking, to keep believing that a woman who loved him the way Brenda clearly had would not simply vanish without reason. It was Marcus who first noticed the strange gaps in Eleanor's account of that final week. A housekeeper who mentioned overhearing raised voices from Eleanor's study, an unexplained withdrawal around the same time Brenda disappeared. He began asking careful questions, piecing together fragments no one else had thought to connect. When Marcus finally laid the truth in front of Anthony, complete with dates, testimonies, and the housekeeper's account of Brenda leaving Eleanor's study in tears days before she vanished, Anthony did not want to believe it. He confronted his mother that same night, and for the first time in his life, he did not hold back. Eleanor, faced with the full weight of her son's fury and grief, finally broke, revealing not just what she had done, but the fear underneath it, the terror of watching everything she had built slip away, the belief, however misguided, that she was protecting him from a heartbreak she had once suffered herself and never recovered from. It did not excuse what she had done, but for the first time, Anthony saw his mother as a deeply flawed woman rather than simply an obstacle, and even in his anger, something in him softened enough to say he still loved her, even as he told her plainly that he was going to find Brenda, and nothing would stop him this time. The search that followed took weeks of dead ends before a single thread finally led somewhere real, a distant cousin mentioned once in an offhand comment. A small city 3 hours away, a clinic where a woman matching Brenda's description had recently started working. Anthony did not rush in. He stood outside that clinic for nearly 20 minutes before he found the courage to go in, watching through the window as Brenda, in scrubs, helped an elderly patient into a chair with the same gentle patience he remembered from their late-night kitchen conversations. She had finally begun the nursing studies she had abandoned years earlier, using Eleanor's money for the very purpose that had made it bearable to take. When she turned and saw him, the shock on her face gave way to a flood of emotion she had spent months trying to bury. She did not run to him. She did not immediately soften. Instead, she asked him quietly to leave, telling him this was not the time or the place, and Anthony, though it broke something in him all over again, respected her wish and left without argument. He did not disappear. He came back the following week, not to demand anything, but simply to sit in the small diner across from the clinic during her lunch break, giving her the choice to approach him or not. The first time, she did not. The second time, she sat across from him for 10 silent minutes before finally asking him why he had come. He told her the truth, all of it, the withdrawal, the housekeeper's account, his mother's confession, the months of searching that had nearly broken him. Brenda listened, arms crossed, tears she refused to let fall gathering in her eyes, and told him she needed time to believe any of it was real. Over the following month, they met like this again and again, sometimes at the diner, sometimes on a bench outside the clinic, conversations that started guarded and grew slowly less so. Brenda's pride, still wounded, made her hesitant to trust so quickly, and Anthony never pushed. He told her about standing up to his mother, about the different kind of legacy he wanted to build now, one rooted in honesty rather than image. Slowly, in small unhurried steps, trust began to return, not because of a single grand gesture, but because he kept showing up, week after week, exactly as he said he would. It was Brenda who finally closed the distance. On an evening when Anthony had once again simply shown up without expectation, sitting quietly beside her on the bench outside the clinic as the sun went down. She reached over and took his hand, the first time she had touched him since the night of the storm, and told him softly that she was tired of being afraid of a love that had never once been the problem. He did not say anything. He simply held her hand back, and for the first time in months, both of them breathed a little easier. Eleanor's road back was slower still, and Anthony made it clear it would take more than an apology. In the months that followed, she began showing up in ways that spoke louder than words, offering to help cover the remainder of Brenda's nursing tuition, a gesture Brenda initially refused until Eleanor insisted it was not charity, but restitution. At a business gala months later, when whispers began to circulate about the housekeeper Anthony Whitfield was now openly courting, it was Eleanor herself who silenced them, introducing Brenda to the room not as her son's companion, but as a remarkable young woman who would soon be a nurse, standing beside her with a pride that surprised everyone who had known Eleanor for years, Anthony most of all. Victoria, for her part, stepped back from the arrangement Eleanor had once tried to engineer with quiet grace, telling Anthony privately at that same gala that she had seen the truth long before anyone confessed it, and that she was glad he had found his way back to the person who clearly made him whole. She did not disappear from their lives bitterly. She remained, in the years that followed, someone Anthony and Brenda both considered a friend, proof that not every obstacle in a love story needs to become an enemy. In the end, Anthony did not choose the life his mother had once planned for him. He chose Brenda, fully and without apology, standing beside her at their wedding not as a billionaire and his housekeeper, but as two people who had survived betrayal and found their way back to each other through patience neither of them knew they had. Emmanuel, thriving now in the university education Brenda's sacrifice had secured, stood proudly at his sister's side. Marcus stood as best man, having never once doubted this was how the story was always meant to end. Eleanor sat in the front row, tears in her eyes, finally understanding that love built on control was never truly love at all. Years later, the story of Anthony and Brenda would be told not as a scandal, but as proof that love, when it is real, survives even its deepest betrayals, because the truth, no matter how long it takes to surface, always finds its way home. And in a quiet garden where their story had first begun, Anthony and Brenda would sit together each evening, watching the sunset, grateful not for the wealth or the empire, but for the courage it had taken to choose each other, again and again, until finally, nothing could pull them apart. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were Brenda? Would you have stayed and fought for love, or walked away to protect the person you loved? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe to Heart and Truth Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.